Judaism is one of the oldest monotheistic religions in the world. Its history stretches back nearly 4,000 years, making it the first Abrahamic faith. Today, around 15.8 million people worldwide identify as Jewish. That number represents only 0.2% of the global population. Yet, despite these seemingly small numbers, Judaism has wielded a cultural, economic, and political impact throughout history that is far greater than many of the world's largest empires combined. Today, we will explore the profound and enduring fundamentals of Judaism in exhaustive detail. To trace the origins of Judaism, we must journey back to the deepest eras of antiquity. The roots of this faith extend nearly 4,000 years to the time of Abraham. According to Jewish tradition, Abraham was born into a polytheistic, meaning pagan society in Mesopotamia, a world defined by the worship of many gods and physical idols. However, Abraham underwent a radical spiritual shift. He adopted monotheism and established a sacred covenant with God. According to this covenant, God blessed Abraham's descendants and declared them the chosen people, a nation set apart for a specific divine purpose. This legacy passed from Abraham to his son Isaac, and then to his grandson Jacob, also known as Israel. Jacob would have 12 sons, and these 12 men are considered the biological and spiritual ancestors of the 12 tribes of Israel. These tribes form the very foundation of a nation that would go on to shape the moral landscape of human civilization. About 1,000 years after the patriarchal era, the historical narrative shifts to a dark period where the Jews appear as slaves in Egypt. Under the absolute rule of the pharaohs, they lived in a state of systematic bondage. But among them, one figure refused to submit to this condition and raised the banner of freedom against the might of Egypt. This man was Moses, a descendant of Levi, one of Jacob's 12 sons. The story of the Exodus is a cornerstone of human history. Moses challenged the Pharaoh and ultimately led the Jews out of Egypt, famously parting the Red Sea to secure their escape. This section, known as the Exodus, remains one of the most critical parts of the Torah, and there is a striking reason for this significance. After the departure from Egypt on the desolate peaks of Mount Sinai, Moses received the 10 Commandments directly from God. These 10 Commandments form the absolute foundation of the Torah, the holy book of the Jews. It was here that the cornerstones of Jewish ethics and laws were laid. In other words, around these commandments brought by Moses and the laws of the Torah, the Israelites gained a common religious and legal identity. The Exodus narrates more than an escape. It chronicles the process of a people fleeing slavery to become a unified nation shaped by divine law. After the leadership of Moses, the Jews settled in the land of Canaan, the land promised to their ancestors. Over the following centuries, they transitioned from a confederation of tribes into a centralized kingdom under Jewish rule. This era reached its zenith during the reigns of King David and his son Solomon. It was during this period that a powerful kingdom centered in Jerusalem emerged. Solomon fulfilled the national ambition by building the first temple in Jerusalem, making the city the undisputed sacred center for the Jewish people. However, this period of unified power was relatively brief. The unity established by David and Solomon did not last. The kingdom fractured into two separate states, Israel in the north and Judah in the south, a division that made them increasingly vulnerable to the rising empires of the east. From 1000 BC onward, the Jewish people fell under the dominion of various foreign states and were repeatedly exiled from the land of Canaan. Among these, the event that would occupy the most significant space in the Jewish collective memory was the Babylonian exile in 586 BC. This period was not just a time of suffering, but a theological crucible. During this exile, the Jews interacted with Mesopotamian religions and incorporated elements they borrowed from these traditions into their own holy scriptures. In fact, historical analysis suggests that a large portion of the Torah was formalized and written down during these years. Crucially, the belief in a future savior, that is to say, a Messiah, emerged during these years of longing and displacement. This belief would, centuries later, lay the theological foundations of Christianity. About 50 years after the exile began, King Cyrus of Persia conquered Babylon and allowed the Jews to return to Canaan, where the Second Temple was built. However, their sovereignty was once again shattered in 70 AD, when the Roman Empire destroyed the Second Temple and sent the Jews into a massive global diaspora. The destruction of the Temple by the Romans was a cataclysmic event that fundamentally changed the nature of Judaism. The central sanctuary, the place of animal sacrifice and priestly ritual, was gone. This forced the Jewish people toward a new way of worship and social organization. Since there was no longer a central temple, the focus of worship began to shift to the local synagogue. Following the Roman exile, Jews lived as minorities within vastly different societies, stretching from the borders of Europe to the heart of the Middle East. Throughout the Middle Ages, they frequently faced intense discrimination and systemic oppression. In many European cities, specific mandatory neighborhoods were established for them. The Italian origin word ghetto emerged from this dark history, specifically from the Venice foundry, known as ghetto, where the first confined Jewish quarter was created. These medieval ghettos were restricted residential areas. In the evenings, their gates were locked, cutting off the Jewish population from the outside world. Nevertheless, despite these conditions, Jewish communities maintained a vibrant internal religious and cultural life. By engaging in permitted economic areas such as trade and money lending, they played a pivotal role in the European economy. In Eastern Europe, Jews developed what is known as Ashkenazi culture, living for centuries in relatively autonomous communities. However, by the 17th and 18th centuries, massive massacres in regions such as Ukraine and Poland began to seriously threaten Jewish life. By the 19th century, systemic violence against Jews broke out under the rule of Tsarist Russia. These attacks, called pogroms, intensified significantly from 1881 onward, particularly within the Pale of Settlement, the specific region of the Russian Empire where Jews were legally allowed to reside. As a result of these pogroms, hundreds of thousands of Eastern European Jews fled their homes. This massive wave of migration led them to North and South America, laying the foundational demographic for the Jewish communities that exist in those regions today. Having looked at the historical journey up to the modern era, we can now examine the core foundations of Jewish belief. At the very center of Jewish tradition is the belief in one, indivisible God. According to this tradition, God is the creator and absolute ruler of the universe, all-powerful, just, and merciful. The relationship between God and the children of Israel is governed by a special contract known as a covenant. According to this belief, as God's chosen people, Jews are obligated to fulfill His commandments, known as Mitzvot, and to serve as an exemplary society for the rest of the world. This is not a belief in superiority, but a belief in a heavy spiritual responsibility. When discussing the Jewish holy book, the Torah is often the first text that comes to mind. In reality, the Torah consists of the first 5 books of what is called the Tanakh, which Christians refer to as the Old Testament. These 5 books are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. However, the Tanakh is broader than just the Torah. It contains 2 other vital sections called the Nevi'im, or the prophets, and the Ketuvim, which translates to the writings. These sections contain the inspired writings of prophets, sacred poetry, and historical chronicles. In addition to the written Torah, there is a powerful oral Torah tradition in Judaism. Around the 1st century AD, this oral tradition was written down for the first time, resulting in a legal compilation called the Mishnah. In the centuries that followed, generations of rabbis recorded their intense discussions and commentaries on the Mishnah. This led to the creation of the Talmud, the definitive guide to Jewish law. The first version, the Palestinian Talmud, was completed in the 3rd century, while the second, more comprehensive version, the Babylonian Talmud, was completed in the 5th century. Beyond these, texts like the Midrash commentaries, the mystical works of the Kabbalah, and Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith have all become integral parts of Jewish thought. The texts we have discussed shape every moment of a devout Jew's life. Daily worship includes 3 specific prayer sessions, morning, afternoon, and evening, along with various blessings recited before and after meals. One of the most recognizable symbols is the head covering known as the kippah. Devout Jewish men wear these because of the belief that the head should be covered as a sign of respect, symbolizing that God is always above them. For this reason, synagogues and Jewish funeral centers always keep a supply of kippot for visitors. Inside the home, Jews hang a parchment holder called a mezuzah at their entrances. This holder contains specific verses from the Torah. When entering or leaving the house, it is customary to touch or kiss the mezuzah, showing that they keep God's commandments at the forefront of their memory at all times. In the Jewish calendar, the holiest day of the week is Shabbat, or the Sabbath. For Jews, Shabbat is a 24-hour period of rest and sanctification that lasts from sunset on Friday to sunset on Saturday. According to the Torah, God created the universe in 6 days and rested on the 7th. Therefore, Jews spend the 7th day without working, intentionally avoiding any creative activities. On Friday evening, the family gathers around the Shabbat table to recite blessings over wine and bread, known as challah. For Orthodox Jews, the rules are strict. They do not light fires, use electrical appliances, drive vehicles, or engage in any form of commerce. The ultimate goal is to detach from worldly distractions and focus entirely on worship, family, and spiritual rest. Judaism possesses a rich annual cycle of religious holidays. Passover, or Pesach, celebrated in spring, commemorates the exodus from Egypt and the end of slavery. Shavuot, occurring 7 weeks after Pesach, marks the day the 10 Commandments were given on Mount Sinai. Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, typically falling in September. It is believed to be the anniversary of creation and marks the beginning of a 10-day period of divine reckoning. Finally, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is the holiest day of the year. For 25 hours, devout Jews fast completely and abandon all worldly pursuits, praying in synagogues to ask for forgiveness for the sins of the past year. Today, Judaism is not a monolith. It is divided into various movements with different interpretations of the law. There are 3 main religious movements that hold the most followers today. The first is Orthodox Judaism. This group represents the most traditional and strict interpretation of the faith. They are known for their uncompromising adherence to halakha, or religious law. For Orthodox Jews, the laws of the Torah are divine and unchangeable. This means strict observance of Shabbat rules and a rigorous adherence to kosher dietary laws. Within Orthodoxy, there are further subdivisions. Haredi Jews are the most conservative and insulated, often withdrawing from secular society to focus entirely on religious life and study. Hasidic Judaism, on the other hand, emphasizes a more mystical, emotional, and enthusiastic interpretation of the faith. The second main movement is Reform Judaism. Emerging in 19th century Germany, this is a more liberal and flexible approach. Reformers believe that the faith must adapt to the conditions of the modern age. They are much more flexible in their rituals. For example, they often worship in local languages rather than strictly Hebrew, and men and women sit together during services. In this movement, ethical and universal values are placed above strict ritual adherence. For reformists, the application of Shabbat rules is left to individual conscience. While this openness has made the movement inclusive, it has also led to debates about the risks of cultural assimilation. The third movement follows a middle path and is known as conservative Judaism. Born in the United States in the late 19th century, it aims to maintain adherence to tradition and religious law while also adapting to modern science and culture. Conservatives generally follow kosher and Shabbat rules, but their religious leaders can allow flexibility as conditions change over time. For example, they adopt a more progressive stance on issues such as women's active roles in synagogue services or the use of modern languages in prayer. Beyond these three, smaller movements like Reconstructionist Judaism or Humanist Judaism also exist. Humanist Jews celebrate Jewish culture and history through a secular lens, often without placing a traditional belief in God at the center. Despite these many sects, many Jews today prefer to identify simply as Jewish without a specific sectarian label. This is especially true in Israel, where a large portion of the population describes themselves as secular or traditional. These individuals celebrate holidays culturally and preserve their sense of identity, but they do not necessarily adhere to strict religious rules in their daily lives. As we look at the world today, half of all Jews, approximately 7 million, live in Israel. The United States holds the second largest population, with around 5.5 million. The remaining millions are scattered across various geographies, maintaining a 4,000-year-old continuity. We have come to the end of our deep dive into the history and foundations of Judaism. To ensure you do not miss our future explorations into world history and faith, make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on. See you in the next video.